Thank you so much, Laura, for the introduction. I would like to thank you for this opportunity and for all of you for being interested in the talk. And my laptop is reminding me that my internet connection is not as stable as we want it to be. So I first apologize if there's cutoffs. Let me share my screen with you. Can you see the slides? Good. So hi again, everyone. I'm excited to share with you my recent work on the gendered pandemic of China. With this presentation, I invite you to bear witness to the collective experiences of Chinese people, especially of Chinese women and gendered others during the COVID-19 pandemic. It has been a year and a half since the first COVID cases emerged in Wuhan in December 2019. Having developed into a global pandemic, COVID continues to give rise to unprecedented social issues and pose challenges to peoples and governments in various parts of the world. As a Chinese international student living in Canada, I feel like I experienced the pandemic twice and with double intensity. I was worried for my family and friends in China and checked for news updates constantly. And since the lockdown started in Ontario, I devote most of my life to learning about the pandemic online and trying to help in all ways I can. I was saddened by the sufferings Chinese people experience and was enraged by how the dominant discourse tried to cover them up and manipulate history. Contents were wiped out, people silenced, social media accounts blocked, including my own. This study then is motivated by my resolution to archive our shared memory of pain, injustice, unity, and hope during the pandemic, to make sense of what happened in China and imagine more equitable ways to deal with crisis from a feminist perspective. It is as well my effective investment as a willful feminist in creating a counter discourse to censorship. So what stands out to me about the pandemic is that warlike measures are widely implemented in many countries, and war appears to be a universal figurative language for the pandemic across locations and cultures. News reports, government officials, and experts constantly refer to the pandemic as war, painting the virus as the enemy that needs to be defeated. There are certainly similarities between the pandemic and the war. Some of the militarized measures are indeed efficient in containing the virus. However, the pandemic is not an armed conflict. Fighting COVID is different from fighting a war, and confusing those two very different kinds of fight can be fatal to civilians. In thinking with feminist scholarship on war, I try to explore the similarities and discrepancies between the pandemic and war, and how the prevailing war rhetoric affects marginalized social groups. Critical and feminist scholars disagree with conventional security studies that perceives war as an isolated incident. Instead, they conceptualize war as a continuum of violence and an intricate system that interacts with the socio-political structure, culture, natural environment, and various forms of existing violence. War has lasting impressions on the society and can be an opportunity for progressive or regressive social changes. Therefore, I frame the pandemic as a complex emergency that resembles war. In doing so, I hope to overcome the dichotomous construct of war and peace, violence and security, and to analyze the processes and institutions that are productive of war and gender, and the ways in which they are intertwined. So, like war, the pandemic costs lives, threatens human well-being, and disrupts social functionality. Also akin to war, the pandemic is deeply gendered and involves a great deal of feminized labor. Yet, unlike war, coping with the pandemic entails caring, saving, preserving, rather than harming, killing, and destructing. I try to shed light on how sticking to warlike thinking when facing a complex emergency have aggravated the precarity of women and other vulnerable social groups. From a feminist lens, gender and war mutually constitute each other. Complex emergencies, such as a pandemic, disproportionately affect women and gendered others. The UN stated that across every sphere, from health to economy, security to social protection, the impacts of COVID-19 are exacerbated for women and girls simply by virtue of their sex. Women take up most unpaid care work and are more likely to have less secure and lower paid jobs than men. Women suffer increased domestic violence and greater health risks due to the pandemic. This is also true in China, where women are the main caretakers, do most housework, and are discriminated against in the job market. In Global Gender Gap Report 2020, the health and survival rate of Chinese women ranked 153, the very lowest of all 153 countries evaluated. So feminist researchers have repeatedly asked where are the women during war and emergencies. But going beyond this classic question, I intend to explore how women and marginalized social groups experience the complex emergency of the pandemic in China and how feminist activism developed amid the crisis. Further, I want to know how gender shapes the socio-political landscape of those emergencies. I ask, where are women, where is gender, where is feminism, and where is security? Attending to these interconnected questions, I focus on both the individual and the political events and public feelings, on institutional practices, media representations, and public discourses. I chose to study the cyberspace because it is increasingly a new public sphere that is ideological, pedagogical, and informative. All of us have been learning online during the pandemic so as to survive, to work, study, and to cope with new circumstances. The online space reflects the situations of a society and public opinions and sentiments. I view Chinese netizens as a culture sharing group and employ an online ethnography featuring longitudinal data collection through observation participation in multiple online fields, including news media, social networks, and other public and semi-public cyberspaces. For instance, I frequently visited Weibo, WeChat, Zhihu, Douban, etc. And data interpretation is informed by feminist theories, existing literature, and my personal experiences and knowledges as a Chinese woman. So, where are women in this pandemic? A large-scale survey found that 95% of women took active part in tackling the pandemic, providing essential services, donating money and things, or joining online campaigns. Women aged beyond 45 are the major participants of community works and are much more involved than their male peers. Their roles vary from delivering medicine to taking people's temperature at public places to offering counseling and free legal aid. This may give us a general sense of where women are and what they do. But the most pronounced group of women during the pandemic are medical practitioners. According to the State Council, 28,000 women medical workers from around China went to help Hubei at the beginning of the pandemic, amounting to 2/3 of the supporting force. And among them, over 90% of nurses and more than half of doctors were women. Notably, nurses are at the highest risk for being in close contact with patients and are severely affected by the deficit of protection gears during COVID. Their heightened insecurity is caused by the gender division of labor that assigns nursing to women and devalues caring work. Yet, compared with medical professionals, the rest of women are largely ignored. With schools shut down and hospitals overwhelmed, women are burdened further with their responsibilities at home as working moms and caregivers for seniors. But as usual, care work in families is overlooked, given no support or subsidy. Further, women whose jobs are not conventionally considered feminine, such as soldiers, police officers, leaders, and organizers remain even more unseen. A potent example is that news outlets eulogized construction workers who built the Leishanshan and Huoshanshan field hospitals in Wuhan. And when they post photos of them, they misrepresented them to be all men. Netizens objected and tried to correct this misconception. In this top left photo, they circled out women construction workers to highlight the proportion of women. And these two photos on the right side, they found captures moments of hard work and exhaustion of women in hospital construction sites. The COVID war is gendered in that it is sustained by women. As Carol Cohen suggests, women's labor has been central to war making. If we must compare the pandemic to war, then women are the major force at the front line as well as in the supporting system. The exclusion of women in non-medical professions is gendered and intersectional. Gender orders normalize women's domestic duties and made them invisible. And as a value system, gender further marginalizes underprivileged social groups. So in the case of women construction workers, we see here, gender is layered and compounded with class. Their jobs does not conform to feminine norms, and their socioeconomic status is considered lower. While we can see gender is everywhere, it is most distinct in the institutional practices and mainstream discourses regarding women during the pandemic. Men as decision makers constantly ignore women's needs. So women medical workers who worked intensely in Wuhan soon faced a desperate need for period products because the government didn't label period products as necessary war supply. When women complained online, they were scolded for not tolerating a minor inconvenience and lacking the sense of sacrifice. Indeed, sacrifice is a theme consistently associated with women medical professionals who were called the most beautiful warriors fighting the pandemic. Media often feature their faces creased from long time wearing of face masks and praising them for sacrificing their physical beauty to fight for the nation. The photo on the right side we see here is a news highlight of a doctor who's sticking to her risky post in her late stage of pregnancy. When women are mentioned, there is an unmistakable focus on their bodies rather than their subjectivity. Yet, although often praised for their sacrifice for the country, women medical workers' absence from the family were frequently discussed, emphasizing their domestic roles. On International Women's Day, March 8, 2020, the government of Shunyi district, which is a district under Beijing, issued a poster to celebrate Chinese women. So let's take a closer look at this poster at the left side. It splits a woman into two halves, one half standing in the kitchen wearing an apron, and the other half in a full medical protection gear in the patient room. It says, when you put on the protection suits, you are brave warriors. When you take them off, you are daughters, wives, and mothers. Happy Women's Day. Well, so in Chinese mainstream discourses, women are denied personhood except for being patriotic moral role models or some men's female relatives. Last February, the official Weibo account of Gansu provincial government posted a video of women nurses having their heads shaved bald, getting ready to join the battles in Wuhan. Men dangle the hair they cut off in these women's faces while they turned away crying. The camera closed up on their tears, agonized faces, and bald heads. After the shaving ritual, the crew of 15 nurses, 14 women and 1 man took a photo together. And the man was the only person who had hair and seemingly wearing a better mask. The gender institutions conscript women's bodies and turn them into sacrifices to serve the grand nationalist narrative. In this masculine war discourse, women's bodies are more gazed at, modified based on male norms, and deprived of agency. Yet the hypervisibility of women medical workers didn't warrant recognition. In publications, award ceremonies, films, and TV, men are often the only ones rewarded and glorified for their heroism in the COVID war. This has stimulated dissatisfaction and heated criticism from citizens and netizens, given that we all know women are the majority of the combatants fighting the COVID. Women's contributions in the pandemic are consistently unacknowledged and erased in order to maintain the masculinity of war and the states. In other words, the masculinity of institutions and discourses around the pandemic is a carefully produced social construction that is protected and reproduced through the oppression of women. The pandemic has made social injustice and gender inequality more visible and thus provided an opportunity for feminist mobilization. As people spend more time at home and using the internet, online discussions and campaigns for justice and gender equity raise more public attention. We've talked before about women medical workers' need for period products in Hubei. Several online donation campaigns were launched timely in response to this need. Among them, Stand By Her became the most well-known. Within 35 days, Stand By Her helped 80,000 women working in 205 hospitals in Wuhan. While some of these initiatives, including Stand By Her, are still active now, they collaborated with 500 secondary and post-secondary schools around China to install period product sharing boxes in washrooms and invite women to take one and give one back and help others in need. They went to rural and remote areas, educating women and girls about period hygiene and providing free feminine products to those who couldn't afford them. These activities have inspired solidarity among women and raised public awareness about period poverty and period shaming. As a result, the founder of Stand By Her, Liang Yu, rose to fame. She talked about women and gender equality online and became a feminist icon and influencer who appeared in news reports, public events, and even commercials for beauty products. But 2 months ago, she proudly announced on Weibo that she's joined the CCP. It was also exposed later that she had tried to sabotage other initiatives that were to help women medical workers. So what we see here is that Liang seemed to have used feminism for her personal interests in political leverage and financial interests. But it's important to see that although feminism is still under attack in China, feminist causes have reached more people during the pandemic, and the governments and big business are very aware of the power of feminism and are eager to co-opt it. Since the lockdown greatly worsened domestic violence against women, a grassroots feminist group launched the anti-domestic violence little vaccine to help prevent the abuse of women, which they compared to the virus. They drafted a public letter calling for awareness and actions, made informative pamphlets, and hosted online workshops to encourage responsible bystanders. They reached a wide audience, both online and offline. Campaigns like this constitute the ongoing conversations about violence against women in China. In April 2020, a liberal magazine reported a powerful lawyer's long-term rape and abuse of his adopted daughter. Feminist activists offered legal assistance to the victim and organized an online petition calling for justice and revisions of law to address the age of consent and power relations in sexual abuse. The petition was signed by a remarkable number of 64,500 people by their real names. Using real names and contact information is risky due to the political sensitivity of feminist activities in China. The fact that so many people still signed suggests great solidarity and determination. In November, a disabled young woman was killed after years of abuse by her husband and in-laws. The first trial only gave the perpetrators a slap on the wrist. In anger, feminists initiated a petition for a retrial, and within 48 hours, we gathered 45,000 signatures. A group of us went to the town where the case happened to inquire the local court and call for justice. One of the most memorable events of Chinese feminist mobilization and Me Too movement during COVID is the court opening of Xianzi versus Zhu Jun in December 2020. 2 years ago, Xianzi sued Zhu Jun, a celebrity, a national TV anchor, and a political mouthpiece for harassing her when she was an intern at CCTV. Cases like this are usually buried, but this one became too well known to be dismissed. So on the court day, hundreds of supporters for Xianzi traveled to Beijing from all around the country, gathered in front of the courts, holding up anti-sexual harassment signs and chanting the slogan, "Together we demand an answer from history." The police threatened and harassed the crowd, but they stayed, supported one another, and followed COVID rules. They maintained a peaceful demonstration, and when they left, they even collected litter around them. This incredibly self-organized rally became a heartwarming story for Chinese feminists and gave us hope for a future of unity and actions. There is obviously a growing public sentiment against gender inequality. This sentiment reached a peak when the Communist Party Youth League created a pair of virtual idols to stimulate patriotism. The cartoon mascots are an older sister, Jiang Shanjiao, meaning lovely land, alluding to a poem written by Mao Zedong, and her brother, Hong Qiman, the red flag, referring to Chinese national flag. Netizens resisted the propaganda and let out their rage by interrogating Jiang Shanjiao. Do you shave off your hair? Have you ever had period? Does your boyfriend beat you? Have your professor and bosses harassed you? Each question references the lived realities of Chinese women, especially the gender-based violence during COVID. The government had to take down the cartoon mascots only 5 hours after their release. Feminist ideas and activities gained momentum online and extended offline, interacting with the growing public awareness of inequality. However, faced with backlashes from both the government and the patriarchal cultural tradition, the future of feminism and gender equity in China remains uncertain. Starting this past April, multiple feminist activists were threatened and silenced, facing fierce retaliation and defamation led by state-sanctioned instigators, both online and offline. Yet we have seen worse and survived. Chinese feminists have been taking advantage of the online space and wrestling with censorship and pushbacks, also keep working in and outside of China for a while now. Almost all the feminist mobilizations I talked about previously involved feminists living overseas. It is no longer easy now to define Chinese feminism, as it is increasingly transnational, decentralized, and collaborative. For instance, Chinese feminists in North America rallied against the increased racism and terrorism against Asians during the pandemic after the Atlanta spa shootings. So what I see here is that the prospect of feminism in China is connected to the global development of democratic and feminist activism. It is obvious that the pandemic strengthens vulnerability and the need for security. In dealing with this complex emergency, the prevalence of paternalistic and militarized measures reflects how where security is placed and how the government perceives vulnerability. As we know, misinformation and miscommunication are detrimental to citizens in the face of a contagious, deadly virus. The government, however, chose to mislead and deceive the public about the virus and keeps disrupting information circulation. The death of Dr. Li Wenliang, a Wuhan-based doctor and whistleblower of the virus, who was threatened and silenced by the police, raise public distrust and animosity against the government. Unfortunately, the outcry of the people and the demand for transparency only led to harsher censorship. It is obvious that the state is prioritizing its legitimacy and stability over the human lives. This authoritarian attitude is commonly adopted by governments of all levels. Strict, meticulous lockdown rules were implemented with little consideration to the social support, protection, and essential needs of citizens. People struggled to get food, patients were unable to access hospitals, and floating populations became homeless in the middle of the winter. In the meanwhile, media and netizens jokingly applauded hardcore antivirus measures, where travelers who tried to return home were expelled, roads were destroyed to prohibit mobility, locks and surveillance cameras installed on personal residences of those who had travel history. These measures greatly perpetuate stranger danger and distrust among citizens. I do believe that lockdown is necessary. However, I argue that lockdown measures should be deliberated over, contextualized, and coupled with sufficient social support. Ruthless coercion often results in tragedy. In January, a man in Hubei was hospitalized for COVID. However, she couldn't get help with taking care of his disabled son, who was left at home alone when he was forcibly confined in the hospital. His son died before he was released from the hospital. Also in January, a woman was beaten by her ex-husband when she brought her son to spend the holiday with his father. She called for the police, who refused to help. She called her family, who tried to rescue them but was stopped by the non-passing pandemic lockdown rules. Eventually, she and her son had to walk for 5 hours to escape. The war narrative is biased towards power and masculinity and devalues care and vulnerability. By adopting the war language and masculinist ways of thinking, the state prioritizes total control over the livelihood and security of individuals. Warlike thinking, therefore, often leads to one-size-fits-all measures, aggression, and paternalistic protection, implying an attitude of fighting and domination instead of caring and collaboration. In this line of thinking, vulnerability is associated with femininity, rendered inferior, and seen as a weakness specific to certain populations. The responsibility for security is thus shifted away from the government and assigned to individuals. Further, the war rhetoric describes the virus as the intruder coming from the other and the outside, causing fear, antipathy, and xenophobia. People who contract the virus came to embody the virus, the enemy, and are further othered and stigmatized. Thus, warlike thinking reproduces gendered othering. If the pandemic is a war, then collateral damage and sacrifice are inevitable to obtain the final victory. Loss of lives and atrocities are hence normalized and trivialized. So to sum up, gender and the pandemic are mutually constructive. For women and gendered others, the pandemic is a continuance and escalation of violence and injustice they already experience. Women play divergent crucial roles in sustaining the society under the pandemic, yet are constantly erased in order to maintain the masculinity of the COVID war and the state. In a time of multiple social breakages and intensified injustice, feminist activism mobilized to aid the vulnerable groups and gained wider acceptance and recognition. However, once the emergency is not as urgent, the rising feminist tide was suppressed. Nation states are gendered institutions that deal with complex emergency from a paternalistic perspective of dominance, and they deny the precarity and interdependence of human beings. Policymakers obsessed with absolute control adopt authoritarian and militarized measures that are detrimental to vulnerable groups and cause social alienation. So why am I thinking about pandemic? I think examining how gender and the pandemic are intertwined is important because emergencies like this is a matter of life or death, of how we live with our human condition of vulnerability, and how we cope with future crises. As the world becomes more and more interconnected, as the environment deteriorates and the natural disasters multiply, as our precarity reproduced by the neoliberal political economy, feminists and critical scholarship must keep interrogating the social construct of gender and emergencies, keep resisting patriarchy and paternalism, push towards equity and justice, and offer alternative social imaginary of disease control and leadership that center on care, ethics, collaboration, preservation, and maternalistic thinking. So that's my talk, and these are the key works I draw on, especially for the conceptual framework. Please feel free to ask if you have any questions and or reach out via email. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chunza. That was brilliant and very, very powerful.
Thank you.
I appreciate you sharing your work with us. Since there's only a handful of people here, I think we could just turn on our cameras and have an informal chat. And so anyone who would like to ask questions, feel free to just either write in the chat if you prefer, or just turn on your camera and ask. I have a lot of questions for you.
Great.
While we're waiting for other people to think of their questions, I was just, I'll ask you what I was bringing up before we started about online ethnography. And so could you say a little bit more about what it's like to do online ethnography? And in these spaces, do you get to know certain interlocutors really well, or is it more like you're looking at themes that you see over the course of Weibo chats? I'd love to just hear more about it because I've never done it before.
Thank you. It's a great question because to be honest, I have tried so hard to wrap my head around cyber or like online ethnography, because it's also new to me. Although we have all learned the ethnographic tradition in humanities and arts, online space is an emerging new place for carrying out ethnographic studies. So for me, the features of an online ethnography is that you feel like there's no boundary of your field. It's hard for you to say my field is this one website, and there's a limited, unlimited influx of information. So being selective and trying to embed your research into a particular field is difficult. And it's also, there's a very vague boundary in the temporal sense, because you can't say when you start, because you've already been immersed in the online world ever since you started using the internet. So I talked with people from my school who's working with research ethics, and we try to figure out how to ethically do an online research. So what I'm doing here is that I try to avoid exposing any names. Well, anyway, people already use the alias online, but I also try to, to anonymize people and try to make informations undistinguishable. And I only identify names when people are widely known or celebrity, or you can easily find their names online. And also, in case to keep myself focused and not overwhelmed by the influx of information, I had to plan out how to follow certain topics. So there are definitely themes emerging from online discussions, the sea of information. When you find relevant incidents or relevant themes in one website, you also follow the links to news reports, people's discussions to see how this incident is taken by the public. So yeah, it's also like it's a very messy process, to be honest, doing an online ethnography. And the reason why I'm still refining my paper is because I feel like it's never ending, and I see new relevant information daily. And also sometimes, lurking and being anonymous while observing other people is giving you this sense of, traditional ethnographic scholars who's, doing this kind of research that may not be as engaging, as participant oriented as you want. But yeah, this is something new that I'm trying now. I don't know if this answers the question. It's just some of my rambling about this new methodology.
Oh, that's a great answer. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the question.
It looks like we have a question in the chat from, so I'll just read it myself. She said, brilliant presentation. I strongly agree. Very moving. And she has a question about the personal dimension and how that's captured in the media. So for example, what role do you think Feng, sorry if I say this wrong, the Wuhan Diary has played domestically and internationally?
That's a great question, because in my paper, I also talk about Fang's work and how I find this case to be interesting because it was first because of the rising nationalistic sentiment that is creating those criticism around her work. Chinese netizens are not satisfied because they feel that China is supposed to be the winner in the pandemic war because we're continuing very swiftly and we're doing better than other countries. However, Fang was exposing all the sufferings and injustice and atrocity that happened around her. And this is one layer of the incident around the discussions around Fang. And on another hand, because Fang is a woman, is a female writer, it's very easy for Chinese netizens, especially instigators who are targeting feminists, to associate her gender to feminist causes. And then, in China, it's a long-standing tradition to accuse feminists for being corrupt and supported by hostile foreign forces, right? So this whole incident around Fang is a combination of nationalistic and masculinist thinkings, and it is a very important incident, to be sure, which I think it shows how individuals may stand out, like Fang, Dr. Li, and also Xianzi, who later became a feminist activist who helped other survivors of sexual violence. They have become highlights in the course of my research in the whole social phenomena around pandemic. And in examining those individual stories, individual courses, we can see through the personal and reach the political and the structural.
Thank you. I think maybe Anna was going to ask a question. I don't know if she turned on her video.
Yes. Sorry, I will not turn it on now. It's a little messy behind me.
No
so thank you for a fascinating talk, Chenze, on a very, very important subject. I was wondering, how did you deal with the issue of censorship, online censorship? I know myself from my own research that, different content, different things, they appear and disappear from online spaces so quickly. And I know people learned all sorts of strategies to deal with it, using keywords to evade censorship and so on. So how did you keep track of those censorship activities, and how did you navigate within this environment?
Oh, that's a great question, because censorship is very special thing specific to research about China, right? All of us have encountered that and tried to grapple with that. For me, censorship works in different ways. Sometimes they set up keywords and they block those sensitive words. Sometimes they have people manually delete content and creating new kind of rules, adding to the algorithm, creating the automated censorship. So for me, what I do is I disrupt my biological clock. I live on China time, although I'm in Canada. I had to follow very closely if there's an incident that is exciting to me, and I have to visit those multiple sites online, talk with people, interact with people, see what they say. And it takes time for censorship to reach new topics and new like hot words. And secondly, I think like Chinese people are also learning to work around, to wrestle with censorship, as we see from Me Too movement in China. People has used rice and bunny to represent me and too, and when some words are blocked, we use photos, and when the photos are like, they have, I don't know, mechanism that detects your characters from the photos, we can like try to make the photo upside down, or adjust the color so that it's like harder for them to recognize. So like, I think this work around censorship is also interesting. People should write a paper on this. But like for me personally, like my main strategy is to closely follow those things before they disappear. And also there are also like semi public spaces where like people may use other media, like Chinese people may use VPN and use Twitter, and also Facebook and WhatsApp. So that's also one way to get around censorship.
Thank you so much, and take care. It's hard to live on Chinatown when you're time when you're in Canada.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. You take care too.
Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating, and it's clear how dedicated you are to this research, and it's very impressive. We had another question in the chat about also about doing online ethnography. So how does consent work in this process? Do you get informed consent, or are they just public spaces where it's not required?
Yeah, this is also one of the main questions I talk with the staff from our ethic board at Western University. It is it might be a gray zone between public or private when you are doing online ethnography, because sometimes you are reading some personal expressions. Sometimes you may get certain information because you're particularly in a social group, which is why I avoid using quotations. And I generalize, like I find themes in people's speech. And the reason why it is not quite practical to obtain consent is because the scale of the research, as I mentioned, like it's multi-sided and the information is always flowing. I don't know when it's gonna end. So what we do is we view this online space as something that is public, as the bulletins board. And when you see things, it is because you're like, everyone can access the same information. And like by not making direct quotes, by like summarizing and like generalizing and like finding themes in the information posts you get from online, you're also protecting the anonymity and privacy of your participants. I think I see some questions on the chat box. I'm sorry. It is like just popping up. Can I?
There's a new one from Gina. Do you see this here? The bottom one.
Oh, yes.
So I'll just read it for everyone. She says that she really loves how you mapped the intersection of feminist activism and the COVID-19 crisis. And could you say more about the importance of the transnational networks of activism that you were talking about? And has the move to more online activities helped or hurt during this COVID crisis?
That's a big question. Let me see. It is a very distinct trend in Chinese feminist activism that, as we may know, because of the arrest of Feminist 5 in 2015, many Chinese feminists went abroad to study and to live, to work, in order to for their own safety and also to continue doing feminist work. So many famous like Chinese feminist frontrunners are now residing overseas, and like they kept working with their colleagues in China, and it's been a while that we have been working this way, and it's not new during COVID. However, like I think COVID provided this specific environment for the world to be so connected, right? Like you see news from everywhere, and you try to help people in countries you've never been to. So during COVID, as I mentioned in the presentation, most of the feminist initiatives in China had participants from overseas remotely. And there's also, because of the geological distance, there's also this sense of like for people like me, for women feminists who's living overseas, we kind of feel this guilt of not being able to be there. So like we can only help in ways like we can make donations, we can help create content online, and like when they do like archive or filing work, like we can contribute in those ways. But I think at least for the COVID, this kind of collaboration really worked out. So when we see the rally for the support of Xianzi for her sexual harassment case, there were WeChat groups like reporting, like real time, like connecting you to what's happening in China, and like filming and sending you photos and updating you about the progresses in court, like how because the court went very long until midnight. So because of the existence of the internet, thanks to that, we are able to like synchronize with our colleagues at home, and also to help in more ways than we used to, to do, like because of the internet and the flow of money and funding and like things. And it's hard to say whether online activities have helped or hurt Chinese feminist mobilization, because they're like, clearly there's an upside because of the circulation of information online, because of those chat groups and technologies. We're able to mobilize, to gather, to find unity and find people with find like-minded people. But also Chinese internet is well, using internet has the side effect of creating the social bubble, right? You're always only focused on like the interact with people and like working with issues you're familiar with. However, I would also like to say that online mobilization is not the only way, because we have a lot of grassroots feminists working in different fields, having different concerns. Like there are groups working for women who work in factories. There are groups who help women as survivors of sexual violence, and there are women who work on queer community. So Chinese feminist mobilization is very decentralized. So different people use the online and offline spaces differently. And like for now, what I see that is, although albeit the existence of censorship, online mobilization is really helping us in disseminating information and like reaching more people. Sorry, I'm rambling again.
Thank you so much. Great answer. I think Shonyan has asked a question also that I'll read out to everyone. She says, thank you for the great talk. Your comment about disrupting your bodily time to follow the discourse before centers catch up is very fascinating, and she hopes you write about it. I think she also is doing that in her work now. So,
oh, great.
Yeah. So, and then her question is, she wanted to ask more about the war metaphor. So in Western countries, we saw the rise of xenophobic sentiment against China framed around a war metaphor as well. And she wonders how this war discourse has played out in the Chinese context. Do the citizens understand the war, or how do they understand the war? Was it just about biological warfare against the virus? And what other meanings and connotations are employed in this war metaphor in China?
Yeah, I think the prevalence of the use of war language is one of the reasons why I chose to study pandemic from this perspective. And it's very interesting to see that people in different locations, different cultures using the war narrative, although they might suggest different things. But as a Chinese person who uses English as a second language, I find it difficult to find proper words to when you try to describe like how you cope with the pandemic. The first language that pop into my mind is, implied in war, like we say fight or like battle, right? And like we also use defend. So I think in the Chinese context, the war narrative is mainly used to suggest the battle between the battle against the virus, because like before the is it before the pandemic or during the pandemic, we have experienced the war between the trade war between China and America, right? So I feel that personally I have this feeling that people at least perceive those wars differently in China, and when they talk about the pandemic war, it is mainly Chinese people trying to triumph over the virus and like overcoming the virus, as we're like we have a better situation in China now. People take pride in having defeated the virus. But it is also true that the war language is not confined to the pandemic, right? As we mentioned before, there's a trade war and there's like other kinds of war we compare to different differences or collisions. So when I saw like Trump is one person who is like very apt in using war, right? This is war is what he often says. I feel like there's definitely there are connections between comparing different things to war. This kind of mentality of warlike thinking is affecting like various aspects of our life in political world and also in biological or like medical sense. So that is why I feel like looking into this war mentality is important. It is because in like security study, war study, and international relations studies, people have consistently detected this tendency to take the stance of fighting, defending, and aggression, domination. So I think that is also one of the problems we're facing now. Like xenophobia is caused because of your intention to defend what you have now, right? Like we never think about collaboration. We never think about the vulnerability of other people. And in this, in creating this war language, using the war narrative, we are legitimizing all the aggressions and dominations we are like implementing in different kinds of situations.
Thank you. You're really got me thinking about Jared Zigon's work. I don't know if you know his book, A War on People. So he's an anthropologist who works on the drug war, and he has done field work with drug users and activist drug users who are actually fighting against the war on drugs. And his book is called A War on People, and to make the argument that the so-called drug war is actually a war against drug users, a war against people rather than against drugs. And so, when you were presenting, I was thinking about, thinking of a war against COVID in China. It sounds like it's also a war against women, a war against feminism.
Well, yeah, it is so true. I think I touched upon this topic during my presentation, that when you perceive the virus as the enemy, the virus is not embodied, right? So people who contract the virus came to embody the enemy and the intruder, people who's supposed to be defeated or like confined in a specific place. So in China, there's like because of this kind of way of thinking, we have been implementing all those harsh lockdown rules that is stopping mobilization, and also there's stigmatization of people who got COVID, because it is supposed to be your responsibility to keep yourself secure. However, when you contract the virus, you are refused by your community. You are supposed to stay somewhere else, not come to home. So for international students, there's also this sentiment against the international students going back to China, because we're bringing the virus back to our country. So yeah, it is. Yeah, there's definitely connections I see here.
So I want to know, could this be your dissertation? I know your dissertation's on a different topic, but this just seems so well developed already and so brilliant. And so how is it going to fit in with your dissertation project?
Well, Thank you so much for saying those nice words about this research. Well, personally, I do think it's still emerging, and I'm still trying to refine it. Well, I work in my graduate study. I have worked with like multiple issues, gender and education, and I came to see higher education as a social institution that is reproducing multiple forms of injustice and like perpetuating the functionality of our existing system. So if there are, well, there are definitely connections between this research and my major topic for my dissertation, which is how individuals encounter institutions. Especially in policy studies, we believe crisis is a perfect time to study policy and institutions, because when things are, put together and like functioning in maybe they're like trying to very hard to maintain the functionality of the system, you couldn't really see what is broken. However, when there's a crisis, things came apart, and then you can examine part by part what is, what used to seem like an entity. Now you can see different parts of like how things used to work. So definitely this doing this research is helping me in seeing the work and mechanism of the existing institutions and discourse from very like specific perspectives, but also like seeing them intersectionally. So I think that definitely helps with my project. But yeah, well, I'm not sure about how feasible my dissertation topic is going to be. It's also possible that I might not be able to go back to China to do my field research, and I might have to shift to another topic. And this can be one of the possible ways I go with my dissertation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you again. If no one has any more questions, maybe this is a good time to wrap up. I saw Shonyan also mentioned here in the chat Emily Martin's work. She's also a medical anthropologist who's written about the metaphors that we see in immunity in public health, especially the war metaphor. So thinking about like fighting viruses as a war and the consequences this has for how we actually carry out public health in a violent manner. So metaphors have these material consequences in the world. And Emily Martin was arguing this decades ago. And still a lot of change is necessary. And thank you so much for fighting that fight. And
thank you all.
Gina, we hope you'll publish it. Me too. Please publish this.
Thank you. I will definitely take some time to work on this paper and see if I can get it published. I think it's difficult for PhD students to get published, but I'll try. I don't know.
It depends on the journal, and I bet if you ask your advisors, they could recommend some good journals. I think this is highly publishable and very timely. So I think you can.
Thank you so much for the encouragement. Yeah, I've been like, because this whole situation is so depressing, and like living in Canada while like living in Chinatown is also like making life kind of messy. I haven't been devoting enough time to make this a publishable article, but definitely because of the feedback and encouragement I received today, I think I'll definitely take some time to work on that. Thank you.
Did you see, actually, Gina mentioned a journal, Feminist Media Studies, and she thinks it's a perfect journal for your project.
Thank you so much, Gina. Thanks.
Yeah, so thank you again, everyone, so much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing your article when it comes out.
Thanks. I'll definitely let you know once it was published. Thank you.
Because we have a bibliography where we keep feminist scholarship. And we would love to promote your work too. So please let us know.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and for being so engaging and being in conversation with me, giving me all those positive feedbacks. I hope to see you again. You can definitely reach out through email if you have interest or on working together or just talking. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.